Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Thanks for being here as always. So today the task at hand is to forge a hog splitter. If you're not familiar with that, it's a tool that was used, maybe it still is used. I'm not really sure. Probably not though. But it's a large. It's like a giant cleaver, basically for splitting a hog carcass in half during the butchering process. So essentially, this is a cross between an axe and a sword, or maybe a cleaver and a sledgehammer, as some have said. But it's a big chopping tool. So the way I'm going to forge this is with a combination of metals. This is actually a commissioned piece here. This is for a customer. So I'm forging a Damascus steel or pattern welded steel hog splitter, and I'm starting with 1045 steel. And these are 1.5-inch round bars. First thing I have to do is forge it down to some rectangular bars so that I can incorporate it into a pattern welded steel billet. So there's quite a bit of forging to be done on this steel before we even get anywhere near a blade-like item. The reason I'm using 1045 steel is because it's tough and shock resistant. Another possible steel you could use would be something like 4140, but I didn't want to use that with the chromium content that it has, because I am going to be combining this with 15 and 20 sawmill blade steel. And not that you couldn't do that, I'm sure you could, but I wanted to go with the 1045. Now, I've never made a hog splitter before, so I thought, what better way to kick this off than make a Damascus steel hog splitter? And I've never made Damascus steel with 1045 steel in combination with anything. So why not try that? So let's just say that there's a few different elements to this project that are a little unknown to me. I haven't worked with some of these elements. So hopefully this doesn't end up in scrapping the whole thing and starting over with something else, but we'll see. So I've got the 1045 forged down to some 1.5-inch by about 1/2-inch bars, 5 inches long. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut out the sections of sawmill steel. And yes, I do have the guard off of my grinder. I'm not recommending that, but it's a risk that I'm taking to get the job done here with appropriate safety gear otherwise. And you know what they say, safety third, right? So I don't have 15 and 20 steel that's anywhere near 1/2 inch thick, so I have to stack this up in the billet. And so there's going to be multiple pieces of steel here. And this sawmill steel is about 70 thousandths thick, I believe, 72,000, something like that. So putting 5 of those together gets you a little less than 3/8 of an inch thick. So the layers of 15 and 20 are still going to be a little bit smaller than the 1045. So getting all this steel cleaned up on the belt grinder here, and I'm using ceramic grinding belts from Empire Abrasives. They were kind enough to supply the belts and the grinding discs. I forgot to mention a second ago, the cutoff wheels for this project. So the cutoff wheels and the ceramic grinding belts came from Empire Abrasives. These are the best ceramic belts that I've used. And there you have it. I actually went ahead and added another 1045 and 15 and 20 layer. So I when it was on the table there, it was 7, and now I'm up to 9 layers of different steel here. So I'm just blowing off all the dust, making sure that we don't have any dust on there. And some of the pieces kind of did. So make sure that's cleaned off. But Empire Abrasives, they have a really wide selection of abrasives, and so for whatever your project is, you can probably find what you need there. So if you click the link in the video description below. That helps the channel out a little bit. And then if you use the promo code FIRECREEK, that also helps me out as well. So appreciate that a bunch. So I'll be using Empire abrasive grinding belts throughout this project. It's going to be a fair amount of grinding to do later on. So dip that whole big billet in the diesel, and here we go. So that will not fit in my single burner forge, so it is time finally to pull out the latest edition of the shop, which has just been sitting there collecting dust for a while, and that is the Majestic Forge 3-burner forge, which I purchased. No, this is not a sponsorship. But anyway, we'll get this thing up and running here. And it certainly puts out the heat. I mean, look at that. So after this project so far, if I had one complaint about this forge, it would be the fact that you can't really adjust the air intake on these burners, which I knew that when I bought it, but I did end up adjusting it all the way to where it was as carburizing as possible, and that wasn't as much as I would have liked to have been able to adjust it. But just a little note, I like adjustable burners, and you do pay extra for those though. So get some flux on there, and get this giant chunk of steel heated up. I don't really know how much steel I need for this project, but I certainly didn't want to end up with not enough. So I went ahead and added that second pair of layers. So we're up to 9 layers here. Obviously not counting the individual sawmill blade pieces. A combination of 5 of those counts as a layer, and they're all forge welded together in our pattern. So got 9 layers here, and we'll get these forge welded up. And I will say that this project, I spent a good half of the week on it, and you'll see how far we got at the end of the video here. But doing a big billet of Damascus like this, what are some of the things that could have helped with this? Well, a better way to hold on to it, which here I'm using some tongs, which is not the greatest, and later on I weld on a piece of 5/8 rod, which is not thick enough, because once that heats up, then the weight of the billet actually bends the rod where it's heated up. And I should have weighed this billet before I did all the forge welding on it, but I didn't. But it's it's got to be 6 to 8 pounds, maybe more, probably more. I don't know. It's pretty heavy. So I decided not to forge this whole thing out into a bar and cut it all up, grind all the surfaces, and restack it and re-weld it. I'm going to go ahead on this project. I'm going to go ahead and do the old-fashioned method of forging the billet out, splitting it almost all the way through, and then bending it over on itself. And so I'm only going to be doubling my layers by twice, but you know, it's exponential, so it's going to go up fairly quickly. So I've got my little cutoff wheel here again, and we're going to grind almost all the way through, leave ourselves a hinge, and now I'm grinding the surfaces off cleanly so that we can get all the scale off of there, prepare that for the forge weld. So this next forge weld is only going to get us up to 18 layers. So that's nice and clean there, ready for our forge weld. Throw some flux on it just to protect the steel while we heat it up, so it doesn't reform that scale on there. And having a forge like a bigger forge like this definitely was nice for this project. I wouldn't have been able to do it in the single burner forge, of course. So obviously when you're forge welding this way, folding it back on itself, you have the task of cleaning and or keeping the steel clean prior to the forge weld while it's been heated up. And I could have bent this, probably should have bent this, 90 degrees before I cleaned the surfaces, which I did. And putting this in the vise would work a lot better too. But hey. Anyway, you can see the 5/8 square rod is pretty flimsy at this heat, and that's kind of the thickest thing I had to use, so that's what I used. But keeping the steel clean. So this project, typically the way I'll do pattern welded steel is to cut up the billet into sections and regrind the surfaces and stack it all up, and that can be one of the most effective ways to get a nice, clean, reliable forge weld. But you keep in mind that the blacksmiths and bladesmiths of antiquity did not have grinders like that at their disposal, and what grinders they may have had were not electric, and they weren't used for that kind of thing. And so cleaning the scale off with a scraper or a brush, that kind of thing, to expose clean steel prior to a forge weld is how you would have done it. And so really keeping an eye on that, and your forge atmosphere, that kind of thing, it takes a little more skill to do it that way. And you can get just as good a forge weld, but you have to pay attention to more things. It's less, forge welding is not foolproof by any means, but it's even more involved doing it this way. I know a lot of smiths do it this way today, so it's not, it's definitely not unheard of. I just typically don't do it this way myself. So with this size of billet and doing it this way, especially combined, I kind of gained an additional appreciation for the blacksmiths, hundreds of years ago, for generations, that they had apprentices with as working as a striker and stuff like that, so they weren't just doing it all by hand by themselves. But it's a lot of work, and I think I said this a minute ago, maybe not, but I spent about half a week of my time not just doing this, but this was my main project, is forging this billet. And so anyway, that's and all of this with power equipment and stuff. So this is my second weld here. I'm just packing it right there, trying to get it sucked down tight before I bring it up to welding temperature. And it's looking pretty good. So here's our welding pass on the press, and you can see that nice steaming appearance of the billet when it's up to a good, at least the surface of it's up to a good temperature to forge weld at. Another thing to keep in mind with the 1045 steel is that the forge welding temperature is going to be a little bit higher than a steel with more carbon in it. So if your higher carbon steel requires a lower welding temperature. I don't know how much difference the range is, not a ton, nothing that the forge can't handle, of course, but it's something to keep in mind. So we've got 18 layers on this. So I definitely could have got my layer count up quicker if I had done what I typically do by forging out the billet to half an inch thick, cutting it up, grinding. So it didn't really save time to do it the way I'm doing it here. It was still a lot of work, long, laborious process. So what happened right here is my little angle grinder burned up on me, which is not the first time that's happened, but I didn't actually get this billet cut all the way through. So I spent an extra amount of time fighting this thing to get it bent over. In between that time, I accidentally allowed a buildup of scale that I didn't adequately get removed. My handle fell off of it, so I'm fiddling around with the tongs here, trying to get it closed up with some flux on it before it really goes south on me. Yeah, so working on this second weld just to get us up to 36 layers here. And so, like I said a minute ago, this didn't really save any time, but there is one advantage to this, I think, and that is you preserve more of your material. So going for the weld pass on this layer count here, what should be 36 layers for us. And you can see we're at a decent welding temperature here, but look at that, it just opens right up. It didn't weld right there at all. And turns out none of it welded. Like I said, I was through these different different circumstances here that screwed me up on that weld. I let too much scale, or let scale develop on it. So anyway, the good thing here is that we still have plenty of thickness to our pieces, and it's not like we're going to be trying to weld paper thin pieces back together. So I'm taking them apart. We're going to re-clean everything up and re-weld this. But the way that this method should preserve material in the long run is that you're not grinding all those layers off that you would normally to get the scale off of all those pieces. So you're only grinding scale off of 2 surfaces every time you weld it, instead of 5 or 6 or whatever whatever number of pieces you have. So there's that, and then every time you do a weld like that, you tend to lose some on the ends, because those are typically not very good welds right at the end there. And so overall, I think this method preserves the most material, but it doesn't save on time or effort. So just another good thing to have in your toolbox. So I got this cleaned up again here and closed that back up, and by the time I did all of this, the 2 pieces just popped apart because I didn't have enough of a hinge left, and so I ended up with 2 pieces. So then I forged those out flat, and we're waiting for them to cool down and try to rush things a little too much. I tossed one into the bucket. It was well at a black heat, but it was still a little bit too hot, and popped a whole weld open on the one half of the billet right there. So another little lesson learned. So now I've got 3 pieces that I have to weld together. They're not really flat, and so I kind of digressed a little more and went back to the belt grinder, really get these surfaces cleaned off. And I tried to forge them flat. I didn't get them very flat. I really cleaned up the surfaces though. So my billet that I kind of got tacked together here in the middle is pretty gnarly looking, but if I got it back in the diesel, which seems to really help. That kind of provides an extra layer of protection. So I'm going to start forge welding from the middle out, because the ends of my billet are kind of flapping around in the breeze right there. So I've got that forge welded from the middle out, so everything, all the flux and impurities and stuff can just be forced out either end, and I'm not going to have to worry about that. So seemed to work fine. And at this point in the game right here, grabbing a quick bite. I'm not sure how it's worked yet, but we've got another couple welding passes on there, and you can see as I'm going up the billet here, nothing's opening up, so that's a really good sign. And then I forged it on the bias, sideways, and it worked good. So we're good to go. So now we've got another fold to do here, and I've got my 9-inch grinder here, just a regular old grinding wheel, so we're going to cut a little more stock out of the middle of the billet, but oh well. Got this thing split in half, fold it up again, so now we're up to 72 layers, I think that's what it is. Or this is it right here. Got that heated up and then bent over. And then this next weld will put us up to 72 layers, if I'm doing my math correctly. So this grinder right here, I really like it. It works great, but it's a beast. It weighs a lot, and my vise is too high. So on this roll cart, so it's kind of fatigues you. So on this forge here, you see I got the air blocked off almost all the way. We've got a nice carburizing flame right there. It's deep orange, dark orange, almost to a blue on the edges. So I'm using the chop saw to cut through this next layer, because now my 9-inch Milwaukee grinder went out. The motor brushes quit. They've been kind of stuttering a little bit, and then it wouldn't even run. So now I have no grinders, no angle grinders. I'm down to my chop saw to cut this billet open, or not open, but to fold it again here. And that actually worked the best out of everything that I've been using to split the billet. But So now I have to take it to the belt grinder to clean up these surfaces before I can re-weld it. So that was a major pain. That is not the tool for that job, I can tell you that much. When the two pieces of billet are still connected together, especially, but it's just not that great for knocking off scale anyway, as we all know. So I finally got that done, got that welded. Really hoping everything went together okay on this last weld here. This gets us up to 144 layers on this big old chunk of steel here, and everything looks good. It's welding up. I do have, when I forge aggressively here on the bias like this, I do have some minor D-lams on the outside coming up on one side from where the ends of the billet didn't fully weld, and as you stretch that out, they lengthen out, so they look worse than they really are. But I'm hoping those are just pretty shallow and can easily be ground off and not really affect anything at all. Just losing a little bit of material, and you can see it right there on there. So that was kind of it for that day. Assuming everything worked well, I'm up to my 144 layer, which is kind of what I'm going for, a more bold pattern on this. I don't want a super high layer count, but over 100 is what I was going for, and so with what I started out with, that worked out good. So went and got myself another grinder. This is a little 7-inch. I shouldn't say little. It's a medium-sized 7-inch DeWalt grinder, which is really a nice compromise between the 4.5 and the 9-inch. So I'm actually glad I got it, because it's got the power, and it's a lot more robust than your little 4.5-incher, but it's not nearly as heavy as that big old 9-inch. So I'm going to exchange that 4.5-inch so I can use it for wire brushing and stuff. I did get a protection plan on it. Anyway, so here we go. We've got the billet forged out. Everything that's good. I was able to grind out those D-lams. They were just surface level, as I suspected. And now we're pressing this out. We're going to start widening this out for the blade. So the blade on this is going to be 16 inches long, about 4 inches wide, 3.5, 4 inches wide, I want to say. And the handle's going to be 18 inches long. So pretty hefty tool here. And I should mention that this is actually going to be used as basically a hatchet or a small axe. And so, not that a hog splitter doesn't have a tough job as it is, but that's where I'm going with this project, is basically making a tool that's designed to chop wood and brush and stuff like that. So as I was pressing this out, I got a few little tiny D-lams showing on the edge of my billet here, which isn't too atypical. Those ground right out, just the very edge of the steel. So there's what we have right there for this week. That's as far as I was able to get on it so far. Starting to widen the blade out. I think we have plenty of stock, so everything looks good. And I'm excited to get this thing looking like a big chopping machine and finish this out and get a nice pattern on it. I've got that blade portion forged down to maybe 1/2 inch, so plenty of stock left there. And yeah, stay tuned for the next part. Appreciate you guys being here. We'll see you on the next video.